So hello, here we are. Welcome to Daily Work Remote Strategies. As you know, we've been doing this for most of the coronavirus time. This is us with our coaches getting together and talking about what could help you. This week is Parenting Week. And today specifically is research findings I wish I knew when my kids were little. And the reason that I asked Sharon to come on and to do this with us is Sharon is one of our executive coaches. She runs huge workshops for Fortune 100 companies on these productivity and things that you can do for resilience, so really large scale things. But the thing is, she has had a very clear experiment of this in her house for the past few decades because she's a mom of 4 kids, all of whom are right about at adult age, right? Is that correct?
17, 19, 22, and 23.
And just recently, Sharon said, you know, I got into positive psychology recently, but what if I had known this 17 and 19 and 23 years ago? So that's what we're going to talk about today. Hello, Sharon.
Hello. I'm so happy to be here.
So let me just start with, what's the first thing that comes to mind? So if you, and let's even start with something really almost funny. You come home with the first of your 4 children, and it's the first one, and it's all those sleepless nights and everything. What's the first calming or useful positive psychology technique to use even in those early days, let's say ages 0 to 2 years old?
So I think my answer for this is going to be the same as it would be even when the kids get older, and that would be mindfulness. So I think when they're really young, if I had had a mindfulness practice, I might have been a little less reactive or better able to handle those huge hormone swings that you have right after you have children. So I wish that at that point in time, I had embraced some kind of mindfulness practice.
Can you give us a range from super easy to embrace mindfulness practice to a little more effort to something that you feel is sort of like, oh, that's good. That's good.
Sure. So even at the beginning of each coaching call, I will have both myself and my client take 3 deep breaths. So the kind of breathing people do in yoga class, that diaphragmatic breathing where you're inhaling through your nose, letting your belly fully expand, holding for a second or 2, and then a long, slow exhale. And effectively what that's doing is calming your nerves and stopping the flow of stress hormones by engaging your parasympathetic nervous system. So just 3 deep breaths creates a sense of calmness. And I can just imagine dialing it back 20 years, how that might have been helpful when there's like a screaming baby that just cannot be consoled. Because out of 4 of them, you better believe I've had more than one. Yeah. So that would be the simplest, is just taking some deep breaths. If you want to get a little more advanced, I would look to some of the guided meditation apps. And maybe just challenge yourself with 2 minutes. When I started my meditation practice in November of 2013, I literally sat with a kitchen timer for 2 minutes every day for 2.5 years.
How was that?
Well, sometimes I was jumping out of my skin. It seemed like forever. And I just kept reminding myself, if I can't sit with myself for 2 minutes, I probably need this practice more than I realized. And after 2.5 years, I finally got comfortable with the 2 minutes. I had lunch with a good friend of mine who's really into mindfulness. And when I told her that I was meditating every day, she said, "What app do you use?" And I thought, what? There are apps? I had no idea. I don't know where I was. So she introduced me to Insight Timer.
You introduced me to that. I have used it.
Right, which is fantastic. With I think they're up to something like 45,000 free meditations. And I started slow, increasing it from the 2 minutes until within about 6 months, I was comfortably up to 10 minutes a day. I find it personally much easier to follow somebody's voice who's guiding me. And since that time, every day I do a minimum of 10 minutes a day.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like 3 possible stages. It's almost like we had pre-prepped this question.
No, you didn't.
No. So it sounds like 3 possible stages are literally just take 3 deep breaths. Really think about that deep exhale, deep inhale, but also deep, longer exhale. 3 deep breaths. Then sit for however short or long you can, but then actually use some meditation that fits you. For example, for you, it's a guided meditation that can make it go longer.
Right. One thing I would add to that, for that middle stage, if you want to create some kind of practice, I would encourage people to start small, because it builds that sense of self-efficacy that you can do it. And so, if you read Dan Harris's book, Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics, which I love, he'll say repeatedly, even 1 minute counts. When I started, I had read in a book that you should start with 10 or 20 minutes, and I knew I wouldn't be able to sit that long. And so I asked myself, what is the smallest amount of time I can commit to doing this every day, where at the end of the day, I can't say, well, yeah, that's really important to me, but I didn't have time today. And that's how I came up with the 2 minutes. But if it's only a minute for someone, that's fine. The more you do it, you build that consistency and that habit, it becomes much easier to then increase the time.
So mindfulness as a way of staying sane amidst being a parent and a working parent at the same time.
Yes. And now the second piece of that is when the kids get a little older, like not infants, but maybe as young as 2 or 3, they always want to do what their mom or dad is doing. So imagine sitting with them for just a minute or 2, because they're not going to be able to sit for very long, and helping them to build a mindfulness practice. That's the number one thing I wish I had done with my kids when they were younger, is to help them build a mindfulness practice.
So if you are listening and your kids are younger than 18 and you still have that sphere of influence, sit down with them for 1 minute a day. Same time of the day, Sharon?
I find it helpful to do it the same time of the day. I think it's figuring out what works for each person and finding a time where you can be consistent. I think it does help to do things at the same time each day, and especially for kids who just thrive on routines.
I'm reminded of something that you and I learned in this Master of Applied Positive Psychology program at UPenn that we went to, which was surprising to me. This VIA strengths assessment that we take, the VIA character strength in parents that's most correlated to happiness in kids is self-regulation. And when I heard that, to me, that translates as routine. So parents who are high on routine, that's happiness for kids.
Yeah, they know, it lets them know what to expect.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got mindfulness. Let's say we've mastered mindfulness. Let's say we've listened to Sharon Danzger here today in June, and we're top of mind with mindfulness. We're good with mindfulness. What else should we do from positive psychology as parents and as working parents?
So I think the next thing that comes to mind is a gratitude practice. And I came to a gratitude practice maybe a little later than most. And when I reflect back, growing up, I grew up with 3 older brothers. My parents were amazing. They really wanted all of us to be the absolute best that we can be. I think in some situations that translates to a level of criticalness from the parents. So we were all swimmers, and I think I've shared this with you before. You could finish your race, and my dad would say, "That was a great race. Do you know how you could be faster?" So I think for a kid, that might translate into, no matter how good I am, I'm not good enough. And I know that that's not the intent that comment was made with. It was more like, you can be so amazing, and here's how. So when I found that my husband and I both raised in similar environments, very, pushed to be as high achieving as we could be, when we started doing that with our kids, we tried to take a step back. And I think one thing that helps to create the neural pathway of gratitude rather than criticism is a gratitude journal. And there are so many different ways that you can introduce gratitude into a family with small kids. So I laugh because when I finally started the gratitude journal, and this was probably about 5 or 6 years ago, I was nervous at first that I wouldn't find enough things each day to be grateful for. And so I was like a little panicked. So all day long I was hunting for good things, which is not a bad thing, right? And
but it also sounds like a little bit of an intensity, like you brought some intensity to your gratitude journal.
I'm a little goal-oriented. I don't like to fall short. So I remember driving my kids to school one morning in the fall, and I live in the Northeast, and the leaves were just in that amazing fall foliage state. And I said to the kids, "Wow, look at the leaves, those colors. It's amazing." And one of them said, "Ugh," rolling their eyes, "enough already with the leaves. They're so beautiful." And I thought, this is good. This is really good, because Whereas the impression that I'm passing down to my kids, my parents are gone now, is that, you know, your grandparents were amazing, but they were kind of critical. You know, they always found ways that I could be better. Well, I think that my kids will say to their kids, to my grandchildren, you know, your grandma, she was so appreciative of the beauty of nature. You know, I can live with that. That's okay. And what I have found over the years, and I've been consistent with the gratitude journal every day, is that I do tend to look for what's good in things instead of how things can be improved. And that's true for if a friend prepares a meal and invites us over for dinner, instead of, oh, that chicken was kind of dry. It's like, it was so nice. I'm so grateful for my friend cooking dinner for me, you know, or things that my kids do to sort of look for the good in what they've done, not the missing 1 or 2%. And I think that for kids, I mean, it shouldn't be insincere. I'm not a big fan of trophies for all, but when you see your kid really do something, instead of telling them how it can be better, to just show that gratitude and appreciation for what's good, I think is really helpful.
I love two things about that. One is that you're sort of not only doing it, but also planning, how does this come across to future generations? That's goal oriented. And then, but this resonates a lot with, I was speaking with Sherry Fisher yesterday about parenting and working in the time of COVID-19. And she was saying just this kind of complimenting your kids for the step in the progress. So for example, as she was saying, so the child tries to solve something. What have you tried so far? What else could you? So just even that they've already putting in the seed in their head, they have already tried something. It might not have been effective, but they tried something.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so with that being said, I'm going to go on because I'm sure your next question is what else? And then the next thing would be focusing on effort over achievement. And that's exactly what you're describing that Sherry was talking about. You know, I think in particular, there are some kids that are just naturally bright that don't have to put in much effort, and they come home with great grades and they're rewarded and given, you know, high praise for it. But really what we want to encourage in them is grit. And that's based on effort, not just natural talent or skill.
So for the parents who are at home and they're working and their kids are walking into their Zoom meetings and they love their kids and they're glad that they're spending more quality time with their kids, what specifically should we all parents be doing now in these times in terms of the rewarding effort that you're describing?
So you're saying like while you're on a call, like a kid might come in, or they resist the urge to come in?
I'm saying in general in these times, we're in each other's lives so often.
Right. I think it's sort of calling out the good things that they've done. I think this is a really challenging time for kids. They've got to be missing their friends. They're very social creatures. They're not, you know, young kids are used to being in school, and what they love about school. I mean, some of them love the learning, but they also love interacting with their friends. So just acknowledging how hard this must be and how much you appreciate that they've been, you know, if they're still in school, that they've been committed to doing their schoolwork, that they're being kind to their siblings. Hopefully they're being kind. I remember when my kids were little, there was an emphasis on try to catch your kid being good and focus on that. Because what they usually hear is the discipline, because it's really easy to identify the times that they're not behaving the way you hope they would.
So if I were to summarize thus far, and I'm also doing it because some people are joining the call, mindfulness, first thing for being things that Sharon wished she knew when she was bringing up her 4 kids before they became adults, mindfulness, any kind of mindfulness practice, gratitude, your own gratitude practice. So you're with both of these, you're saying it's a good side effect if your kids also take it on and see you doing it, but really do mindfulness and do a gratitude practice for yourself. Was that accurate?
Yes. Yes.
And then the third one, you're saying really talk to your kids in terms of effort, regardless what age, but that you saw them taking those steps and making the incremental progress. Is that accurate?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the one thing, just sort of circling back to the gratitude, while I think it's important to model behavior to kids, like my kids know that I have a gratitude journal. The other day, my 17-year-old, you know, she saw that I was writing it. She goes, I'm number 3, you know, I cut a watermelon for you or something, right? And it was so cute. Like she wanted to get in my book, which she's in more often than she realizes. But she knew what I was doing and she was aware of it. So I do think it's helpful to model the behavior. You can also include them in the behavior. I mean, probably one of the most common gratitude practices is what went well, or the 3 blessings exercise that you can do as a family. You could do it at dinner time or at bedtime, but the same thing, like if you can create some consistency so it's part of the routine, your kids, if they know at dinner that you're doing the what went well exercise all day long, they will be hunting for something to share at dinner. And the other one that I love to do with kids is this idea of a gratitude jar, where maybe with the what went well, you know, each day, or sometimes people do it at holidays on little slips of paper, to just write down something that you're grateful for and put it into the jar. And then when someone's having a tough day, they can go into the jar and remind themselves of some of the things that they're grateful for.
So you have done this. I've never done a gratitude.
I have not done the gratitude jar because my kids were already teenagers by the time I learned about it. So it goes right down on the list of things I wish I knew when my kids were younger.
So the idea is write down those things and pull out of them on those days when you scrape a knee and you're crying or something else is going on.
Right. Or, you know, look, it's human nature to have some days where you're feeling kind of down, and to sort of go into the jar and remind yourself of things that you have to be grateful for.
So as we start to wrap up on the formal part, before people just pound at you with questions about parenting and working during the coronavirus times, I'll summarize with mindfulness, you're saying, gratitude practice, you're saying, talking to your kids about their effort. And then right now you've also been saying, just can you summarize this last part about the progress and the making incremental part, what you're describing with kids and how they can use gratitude but themselves, just this last part.
Oh, so it really falls underneath. So the gratitude sort of section of this little chat we're having would be, one, to have a gratitude journal yourself so that you are seeking out things to be grateful for and looking for the good in what your kids do, but also to have a gratitude practice as a family, or even encourage your kids to have a gratitude jar, their own personal gratitude jar, where, you know, you can give them some slips of paper, and whenever they're grateful for something, put it in the jar. And when they're feeling kind of down, which happens to all of us, totally normal, you know, one way to cheer yourself up is to remind yourself of, you know, some things that you're grateful for. Yeah. And just pull those slips out of the jar.
Or even the conversation that you're mentioning. So having that gratitude conversation, what went well today?
100%, yes.
So everybody getting involved.
Yeah.
So before we open this up to questions, if people listen and take away one action, what's the one action that you hope people would take away from this session today?
Oh, that there is something I can do, and which of them doesn't really matter, because I think different things speak to different people. But if anything that was discussed, you thought, that's kind of easy, I could do that, to try it and see how it goes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sharon.
You're very welcome. Bring on the questions.
Questions. You can put your questions into the Q&A section, into the chat section. We are speaking with executive coach Sharon Danzger, who is an expert in productivity and resilience, and she is talking to us about parenting, and she has raised 4 kids to adulthood, which I have not yet done with 2. So I'll start with the first questions. Please type in your questions, and as usual, please either type in a question or one thing that you are taking away. What's one action you're going to do? So please type in either your one action or questions, and I'm going to scan for questions. All right, so here's the first question. What if your child is very resilient? Sorry, resilient. I got that wrong. What if your child is very rebellious towards what you are trying to introduce into the family life?
I would say it's either a teenager or one who's acting like one. So I think I now sort of having a little bit of 20/20 vision. I think rebellious behavior is actually part of them growing up. It's so painful for the parents and so challenging, but it's them sort of expressing their own sort of need for free will and autonomy. And so maybe it's, since we all have this need for autonomy and to make our own choices, you know, how would it be to offer them a few different suggestions and see what they want to do? So give them some choice so they don't feel like they're being told, you have to be grateful, you know, and to sort of get their input on what the family does.
So introduce something, but give them choice within that thing that you're introducing at any age.
Yeah.
Yeah, I personally can relate to that, and I think that it would be super, super helpful. Awesome. Next question. What do you do when your kids come to your important meetings multiple times and request your attention? Oh my gosh, I'm so glad this person asked this question. I can relate.
Well, the good news is people have never been as forgiving of that happening as now. And so it's important to remember that it is not a reflection on your parenting abilities or skill, right? It's a reflection that you have a child that is curious, that loves you, that wants to be with you. And so you don't really want to get angry at them. I mean, of course, we've all seen that famous video of the kid coming in and this guy is in a very serious meeting and it was pre-COVID and it's hilarious, but he's like shoving the kid away. And I don't think, you know, I'm sure that he loves his child, and I don't think that was necessarily reflected in his actions because he kind of panicked, right? He didn't expect it.
Did you see the follow-up to that, by the way?
No.
During the coronavirus time, same person, but had sort of the same children all around, and this is the new normal, which it is.
Right. So now it's more acceptable than ever. If you're concerned that they're doing it, when they don't do it, be sure to reward them, you know, like praise them for, like, I'm sure you wanted to come in, and I so appreciate it. That was really amazing that you were able to keep yourself entertained and, you know, do whatever that they were doing. And so, you know, kids, they seek our approval and our praise. So if you praise them for what they did that was not the disruptive thing, they're more likely, hopefully, to continue that behavior. But, you know, kids are a little unpredictable. It's part of being a kid.
Thank you. Awesome. Okay, next question. What positive psychology idea or research finding in your past do you recommend for sibling fighting?
I'm still working on that one. My 22 and 23-year-olds, given the opportunity, will be found wrestling on the floor, and they're like both 6'2" and big guys. It's terrifying. Senia, do you have an answer?
So I'd say my goal is to have them resolve it themselves. But how I get to that goal, I experiment with different things. I don't like to be the judge. So I don't like the tell me your story, tell me your story.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know how to get them to solve it. But that's the goal of things that I try.
I do remember, so my kids, it's 3 boys and then a girl. And the 2 oldest boys, from the time they were very young, were always very, very physical with each other. And it always terrified me that they were going to really hurt each other. And I remember speaking to my mom, because I also coincidentally have 3 older brothers. So I knew that she's experienced this physicality with the boys. And her advice to me was, remove all sharp objects and let them at it. They are really unlikely. They will always stop just before someone really gets hurt. And in my experience, she was right. Like, I can't make any promises, but they've been very physical with each other for many, many years. And so far, other than a few stitches, they've been okay.
A cautionary tale of what happens.
Yes.
It's okay. It works out well. So I'm going to scan again for questions. Questions for Sharon on anything about positive psychology, things to apply with kids, anything on mindfulness, on gratitude, on effort. I'll ask one. Let's say you've got the mindfulness down and you're doing a gratitude practice and your kids see you and you're talking to them about effort. You process, progress, effort. You're talking to them about that. What else can I
add? So I think the other thing that comes to mind is just a focus on strengths, and strengths over weaknesses. I mean, our whole society, think about performance reviews at work. It's always trying to attend to the deficiency instead of the strength. You know, I remember kids in school, if a kid was great at math but weak in writing, they'd be pulled out of math to work on the writing, and effectively making them kind of mediocre in both. So I think identifying kids' strengths, calling out their strengths, you know, a little bit of strength spotting when you see them, when a kid asks a ton of questions, and it can be kind of irritating to a parent, they are actually flexing their strength of curiosity. And so we want them to stay curious because it's a great quality to have. And so calling out their strengths, because as I said before, the more we recognize things, the more that they want to do that thing that gets them the attention. So focusing on their strengths, and maybe even with siblings, you know, being able to recognize that their strengths are different from one another. I mean, I will tell you, as a parent, it took me a little longer than it probably should have to recognize how different my kids were. And that actually necessitated different parenting styles for each kid. So I have learned a lot from parenting 4 kids with very different personalities and different strengths.
Mhm. I love what you're saying about strengths because it's very specific. So just like you've said, or just like the question that we had about what if your kids are coming into your video meetings, yes, it can be you're reacting in that moment of please step back, I'll be out in 15 minutes, just all of that. But what if you actually speak to them in advance, or what if you do afterwards, or you say, wow, your strength of curiosity about your own book is so cool that you can harness that. And it depends on the ages of the kids too.
Of
But I love
course.
about strengths that you can get specific, that it's not just you're doing great or this was so nice, but it's I saw you do this. It's what you talked about that we've always heard about, catch them something doing something right, but it's very specific. Here's the thing I observed. Here's what I saw.
Right. I think kids are on to sort of like very vague general praise doesn't land so well with them. They're onto it, right? It doesn't come across as sincere or authentic. It's much like adults, right? Like if someone gives you sort of a vague compliment, it doesn't feel like much. But when someone's really specific and calls out a specific strength, it feels really good.
Yeah. Feels like you had something to do with that.
Right.
Thank you so much, Sharon. We're going to end with what we always ask at the end, which is what is your, and we've already asked you what is something that you would recommend, and you've said choose one thing that resonates with you and that like low hanging fruit you can do. What is sort of a metaphysical question to end on? What is your wish for us here who are both parents and working during these coronavirus times?
Oh, just remember those 3 deep breaths. They go a long way, a really long way.
And it's nice because you do it at the beginning of several different meetings, so you get it automatically
I
anytime
get
you're
it
refreshing.
all day long. And the one thing I will say is my mindfulness practice, my kids see a difference in how I respond to stressful situations.
Yeah.
Because I'm responding, I'm not so reactive. That's why I think it's really like, it's like a wonder non-drug.
The wonder non-drug of mindfulness.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sharon.
It's my pleasure. It was great being here.
Thank you, everyone. We'll be here again tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. We're here every week, Monday to Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific. Look forward to seeing you again. All the best. This week is parenting week. All the best. Thank you. Thank you.